on the condition and existence of time. So it's extremely important to listen to what they can say about the end of times, especially because 10 years ago, we had the opportunity of having them exhibiting in Mexico City and also in Spain and Argentina, in a completely different moment, where probably the question of the end of times was not so apparently here. So when I suggested that we would have SHUDDHABRATA SENGUPTA as a speaker, I was hoping to listen to him to update the issues in relation to the imagination of that date. I would like to end saying that, of course, SHUDDHABRATA is many people as we are, but he knows how to manifest them. He's a filmmaker, he's a thinker, he's an artist. And he's a member of a triad, the Raqs, that is probably 3 people, because 2 people cannot be multiplicity. I would like to share with you in this creation that one of the members of the group once made. Monica Narula once told me that the division of labor within Raqs was very clear, that Gibesh Bianchi was the maker, that Monica Narula was the thinker, and that SHUDDHABRATA SENGUPTA was in charge of dreaming. So I hope that you will understand why it was important to bring the thought of dreaming into this session. Shuddha, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cuauhtémoc. I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. We've been trying and struggling how to secure a way of sharing my presentation, which I will attempt to do once more.
Do share and then choose the screen you're sharing, the item you want to share.
Yes. I think, can you see some of my screen now?
Yes. You need to put full screen, I think.
Full screen.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Does that work?
Apparently, yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
You probably need to just close the line to the side. Maybe you just need to push it. But if not, don't worry, and that's it.
There we go.
Excellent.
Okay, perfect. Great. I would like to thank the organizers of the 48th International Colloquium on Art History, hosted by the Institute for Aesthetic Investigations. What a great name for an institute, Aesthetic Investigations of UNAM, for this opportunity to present some ideas that I've been playing with regarding aesthetic dispositions and the feeling of the end of time, or as Cuauhtémoc might have said, the dreaming of the end of time. It's a pity that I can't be here in person with you today because of a few pressing commitments back home in Delhi, because I would have very much liked to listen to all the other panels and benefited from the very rich conversations that I'm sure you're all having. I hope to have better luck and to be in Mexico City again, a context that I love and respect, sometime in the not too distant future, certainly before the end of time. Before I begin, let me thank Professor Cuauhtémoc Medina, my friend, interlocutor, and occasionally co-conspirator, for the grace with which he has accepted the responsibility of being my interlocutor today. I know that a chapter of his professional responsibilities at the MUAC is ending, and that he has a worthy successor. MUAC is an institution that was host to our work in a remarkable exhibition that Cuauhtémoc just talked about, together with that he curated with our friend Ferran Barenblit. And the show was titled Es Posible Porque Es Posible. It's possible because it's possible. And I'm reminded of that title because it is a nice way to think about the end of time as well as the postponement of the end of time. Es posible porque es posible. I say Cuauhtémoc's intervention here with me today is an act of grace because it is just about dawn in Delhi right now. The night is ending or has not yet ended, and it can feel a little like the end of time, or as we would have in one of the clocks that my colleagues and I in the I'm trying to
just leave it. We put your face on top of for the transmission. Don't worry. Should leave it like that.
Yeah. So, and I'm because we make a lot of clocks, and a sense of time itself is very much a part of our practice. Right now, at this moment of dawn, it could feel awe past epiphany, tending towards fatigue. So if I make little less sense than I should today, blame the fact that even when it's not the end of time, and yet it feels like the end of time because everything is that is happening in the world today, you need occasionally a Medina to rescue a SENGUPTA from his daily eschatological crisis. I am not an art historian. I hope that what my colleagues and I do in the Raqs Media Collective will one day pass over into the twilight zone of art history. Then people might debate our provenances, discuss the anxieties and delights of our influences and the contagion, if any, of our own influence. But one of the things that I think they will reflect on is the fact that we made clocks for night and day, like this one, day and night, night and day, under the assumption that any day could be the end of days. That time could stop, return, turn back on itself, eat its tail, or dance some kind of zigzag dance that went like it does here in this clock, which is written in Sanskrit, between Adi at the beginning to Kshan, the moment, to Iti, end, and then return to Kranti, revolution, by way of the Kadachit, occasional, Asamai, untimely, Pran, breath, of a Grahan, eclipse, or a Taru, tree time. Here, time can be verdant like a forest, bleak like a desert, barren like the moon, and as alive as the breath of our asthmatic age. Time is more than the subject matter of our work. Time is an actual medium that we work with. And when you consider time as a dynamic, you find things repeating. Repetition and variation are both the heart of time. Repetition ties a moment before to a moment after in terms of continuity, and a variation distinguishes the moment before from the moment after. There can even be a repetition of a variation. We could say that the end of time has come and gone several times as a repetition within a variation. A repetition of a variation is a pattern. Seeing time is sensing patterns. And that's why we pay attention to repetition and to think about ends and beginnings, especially when it is not the end of time. Like it is not, even though it feels like it is right now. In fact, in India and in many parts of the world touched by Indic culture, the epic narrative of the Mahabharata, which we referred in a narrative machine that we made entitled called the K.D. Vyas Correspondence, which you see right now on the screen, which is why in my languages, there is a really ambivalent attitude to the question of ends and beginnings. In Bengali and Hindi, the word for yesterday, tomorrow, time, and deaths are in fact the same word, kal. One infers its exact meaning from the context within which it is spoken. The epoch we are in is now the Kali Yuga, the age of Kali, of chaos. It is what the end of the Mahabharata war ushers in with its own apocalyptic end of time. From that perspective, the apocalypse, which means unveiling in Greek actually, the event of eschatological finality and grandeur, is already over. We live in its wake in this part of the world in declining time. And so the redactor, Krishna Dvaipayan Vyas of the Mahabharata, who is immortal, and his name means dark, articulate, island-born poet, who we style as our nagging correspondent in the K.D. Vyas correspondence, which is a hyperlinked video sculpture that tags the 18 cantos of the Mahabharata in 18 videos that reference events in the narrative of the war. So Vyas laments somewhere in the epic, saying, I stand with my arms upraised, but nobody listens to me. And then he writes us a letter like the bitter pensioner would, articulating and complaints about declining civic services and says, somewhere in this letter, he says, "Dear Raqs, have I spoken already about declining time? It does not matter whether I have or haven't, because things have been going steadily downhill for almost as long as I remember, and at least since the first dice was thrown and the game began in earnest. It only got worse after that. You know how it was with that crone Gandhari's curse, the one who condemned the generations to come, who made the fruit in the womb of the future go bitter with premature regret at having to be born. How can you, inhabitants of the future, cope with the poison of badly timed regret, the impossible regret for that which is yet to be? Nothing I can say can arrest the decline. Ashwatthama's shadow, I'll come back to Ashwatthama, only lengthens, it never fades. The battlefield shifts location, but the war never ceases. Tonight or this morning, it is Lebanon. Tomorrow, it will be elsewhere. The question is, how can we stay sane, knowing that the markets are buoyant when widows are in mourning? I don't worry so much about myself. My sanity was purloined a long time ago when I entered this sorry business of editing the truths that the gods hurl at us. But I worry about your sanity. How will you watch television and maintain your dignity? How will you read the signs of your times and still go to bed at night? How will you find it in yourself to awaken, like I have done, in the morning? Somewhere in the labyrinth of eternity, now I'm not reading Vyasa's supposed letter to us, I'm coming back to my presentation. Somewhere in the labyrinth of eternity, a war in Lebanon is repeating itself. There was a war in Lebanon in 2006 when this work was made. There is a war in Lebanon now. And it is our belief that the art historians of the future might rehearse a confusion about whether or not we, Raqs, time traveled between these wars in search of a confused, cursed immortal. Someone we believe haunts every battlefield of civil and uncivil wars everywhere. He could be in Gaza, he could be in southern Lebanon, he could be in the Ukraine, or in some forgotten but still smoldering war in the Congo or in Sudan or in Afghanistan. He is Ashwatthama, another immortal, but immortal cursed to immortality. The wounded, undead zombie warrior, the one whose time never ends. Ashwatthama, the man, not the malingering, unfortunate dead elephant. Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, whisper, rumor, malingering battlefield rumor. Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, warrior, son of a warrior. Ashwatthama, invincible Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, the man, not the unfortunate dead elephant. Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, whisper, rumor, malingering battlefield tumor. Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, accursed, haunted, hunted Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, womb raider, abortionist of the future, prisoner of time. Horses stop in their tracks, Ashwatthama. Elephants stumble, tanks rust, missiles misfire, citadels collapse, cities empty themselves to defeat. Just the name Ashwatthama. Unhappy Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, ashen, ashamed Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, deserter, deserted, desert Ashwatthama. Now is the time for a bad art historical exercise. Let's arbitrarily jump a few millennia and move from the fabulist to the historical, from myth to the history, and that still can't get rid of the ghosts of its myths. And so we move from a haunted eternal warrior to a long dead king, from Ashwatthama of the Sanskrit epic to Jahangir, world Caesar of medieval Mughal history. Jahangir, emperor, patron of the arts, commissioned a series of remarkable imperial portraits, such as this one, and is titled Jahangir Prefers a Holy Man to Kings, by the painter Vichitra, whose name means the strange, which shows the emperor seated on time, because you see him seated on an hourglass, and disinterested in other sovereigns of his time, including the Ottoman emperor and the King James I of England, and below him the painter who's painting the picture that he holds in his hand. Instead, what Jahangir is doing is exchanging a book with a holy man. As if to indicate that sometimes Jahangir does entertain other monarchs, there is another special painting titled Jahangir entertains Shah Abbas of Persia, which is another timekeeping device, a golden Augsburg automaton. Diana, the stag, which is seen in the courtier's hand. His other hand is a perch for a hunting falcon. This automaton was one of those marvels of the age that the Mughal court collected, and it's strange to see this object translating commerce between Austria and Delhi in Mughal India. What are these indicators of time? An hourglass, a repetitive, recursive clockwork automaton of Diana the Huntress. What are they doing in these paintings if they're not suggesting that Jahangir, world Caesar, has not just captured space, but also has his grip on time? And it is this grip on space and time, the universe itself, that is repeated in other allegorical paintings, such as Jahangir executes the Abyssinian rebel Malik Amber, the painting on the left of the screen, or Jahangir executes poverty, the painting on the right. In the first painting, the decapitated rebel's head is a would-be perch for an owl, and a Persian verse calligraphed close by says, "The night-colored head of the dark slave has become the house of the owl." It's a strange invocation, and it strangely recalls another apocalyptic reference, the book of Isaiah in the Bible, which we know that the Mughal court was obsessed with, scoring it for prophecies, where the prophet Isaiah gives warning by listing the signs of the end times. And there are many, but most importantly, the 15th sign, "There shall make the great owl her nest and lay and hatch and gather under her shadow. There shall the vultures also be gathered, every one with her mate." So here is a painting that references the killing of a rebel, the book of Isaiah, and the signs of the end times all at once. In the Mughal painting tradition, biblical themes of the flood, of the day of judgment, are wherever you care to look for them. In the second painting, the allegorical death of poverty is staged not on a planetary globe, but on a lion in the company of a lamb, another end-time sign, while abutted below by a figure who could be Noah and a rather fishy behemoth, or Manu, the lawgiver and first man of Indic mythology, who's rescued by the god Vishnu, the preserver of time. Here he is again. Manu, in a later miniature painting of the hill forts that arose during the decline of Mughal power, being towed in an ark in the company of 7 sages by the great fish, which Vishnu in his piscine, fishy avatar. The flood that comes at the end of time signals a desire for the end of time. And so the day of judgment begins to make its presence felt. Here is a late Mughal copy of a European Day of Judgment fresco, replete with angelic cherubs celebrating the advent of the Messiah. But the most remarkable image that I've come across in the course of my wanderings in the Mughal court's painting atelier is an echo of this print, a work by a Dutch artist which was clearly in the possession, like many other European artworks, in the 17th century Mughal court. Here it is, echoed and copied by a Mughal court painter and his associates. The stark bleach and black and white of the Dutch print is transformed into a work of delicate Mughal coloration. Jesus and Mary are exactly where they need to be, enthroned in the heavens. But St. John the Evangelist, the one who transcribes his intensely visionary experience, his apocalyptic unveiling of the end of time in the book of Revelation, in the Mughal variation, loses the cross he's carrying, because a Muslim Jesus, an exalted prophet, redeemer at the end of time, would not have to undergo the humiliation of crucifixion. And so we have a vision of biblical end time, replete with corpses rising from the graves. There you can see skeletons at the right-hand corner below. Replete with corpses rising from the graves, the dead being judged and consigned to heaven or hell, but with discreet, delicate Muslim characteristics, as befits a precious object, a prize item in the collection of a Muslim emperor, arguably the most powerful Muslim emperor of his time. This is end time, endowed with the imperial imprimatur of stable eternity. It does not have the turbulence of a North European apocalypse beset by plague, famine, and war. The cheerful, docile skeletal figure at the margins of the painting remind one of his other happy harbingers of the end, like this Chittapati couple, guardians of the funeral pyre that are stock characters of the Tibetan Mahayana Buddhist imagery. They are present in this charming pastoral evocation of the dance of Shiva and Kali, the goddess of death, against a background of dancing ghouls and demons. There is nothing but joy and calm celebration in this invocation of the dance of death. Because when Shiva dances his dance of destruction, called the Tandav, he ends time, and the cycle of the epochs turns again towards a new beginning. In this remarkable and incomplete, because it misses the ring of fire around the dancing Shiva, bronze Chola sculpture from sometime in the 8th century, we witness Shiva as Nataraja, the lord of the dance, dancing to end time. Under his feet lies crushed a dwarf, commonly known as Apasmara, or forgetting. The dance of the end of time is danced on the back of amnesia. But death is always a lesson, a parable. And even if the event of death is consigned to oblivion, some lessons remain. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, and here I would like to present as a penultimate witness another Mughal illustration of a folio of the Bustan of Sadi, a Persian classic known throughout the Islamic world as the Mirror of the Princes, full of fables of moral and political instruction for tomorrow's political leaders. In this instance, the image illustrates the parable of a rich man regretting his triumph over his enemy when he saw the latter's corpse. It's in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. It's a delightful image. And it says, there's a verse over the painting, "At anyone's death from rejoicing refrain, for after he dies, you just a moment remain." Death here, the end of the time of a particular life, no matter how significant, is not something to be dreaded or lamented, but something to be contemplated in sobriety as a lesson. What kind of sobriety might we advocate in an age where climate change, war, the rise of authoritarianisms of different kinds seems to advance and anticipate the end of time? I might end with an archival photograph that formed one of the many catalysts for a work we made to commemorate the centenary of the First World War. The larger work is called Not Yet at Ease, which suggests that the First World War, like the War of the Mahabharata, has never really ended. This short video work is called Three Shadows. Let me end by reading a brief note we write about this image. The photograph itself is called Indian Porter Corps Open Theatre at Pooch, a photograph held in the collection of the Imperial War Museum in London. Depicts three dancing figures shrouded in white, dancing for a group of men seated around them in an open field. This field, incidentally, is in a place called Pooth in Iraq, where this company of Indian soldiers starved to death in the middle of a siege. A sergeant or officer stands with a cane in the upper right-hand corner of the frame. The performers and the majority of men are porters, members of the Indian Labour Corps, who form an important part of the narrative of this installation. In Three Shadows, three dancing figures, transvestites, who would have been isolated and animated to render them into ghostly spinning specters. This is in keeping with the fragments found in letters from the battlefields by Indian soldiers and non-combatants referring to specters and sound recordings, and referring to specters and ghosts. And a sound recording of an Indian prisoner of war in a camp in Germany that we resourced, speaking about ghosts emanating from the battlefields. Three shadows of care, rage, and indifference hover between occurrence and oblivion, not yet at ease. Not yet at ease. Not yet at the end of time. But when it is a time to end, a presenter must stop, and so must I. Thank you. get to do with this.
Thanks a lot. Can you stop the sharing, please?
Yeah.
So we can talk a little bit. It's been an incredible journey through not only an imagery that is really, I mean, at least for me, new, that I never had really even suspected. And I think my first question has to do with how do we negotiate these figures that you brought? Because you seem to expect, especially by the end of your talk, to find a certain sobriety. I guess it's a sobriety that comes from the acknowledgement that there's been a number of different instances of the figuration of the end of times, but also that there are some of those figurations that are not apocalyptic, have a on the one hand, post-apocalyptic Kali-esque character, but also because they relate to the negotiation of imperial powers. So I probably would like to start from there. I mean, beyond the arrival of these images of sobriety, what would be guiding you to suggest sobriety? You feel that we have a drunkenness of millenarism, that what we are experiencing at this point, and somehow this symposium has to do with this inability to find a certain serenity of time, or the excess of expectation of the serenity of time, the wish of world death.
Thank you, Xicohténcatl. That's a wonderful and complex question. I think one of the great advantages of art history is that it allows us a comparative embrace of different traditions, different ways of figuration in different cultures. So the image of apocalypse, when it travels from one culture to another, or when it is mediated between cultures, often takes on a different tenor or a tone. I like to think of this as a bit like long intercontinental flights that are often late either in arrival or departure. And in that lateness, something happens to the quality of time. There is something that happened, I think, when the pictures of the apocalypse, the idea of the apocalypse is not absent in Islamic theology, but the image of the apocalypse is absent. When the image of the apocalypse arrives on a long intercontinental flight from, let's say, Flanders to Delhi, something changes. I mean, it's not that wars have stopped or famine has stopped or the plague has ceased, but the late arrival of the end of time suggests that the end of time has missed the timetable. And for me, that's a very interesting phenomenon. The idea that the spectral nature of the global planetary crisis is distributed across time zones, much less so today than it would have been in the 16th century, right? So there is, in some ways, an uneven development of the apocalypse, shall we say. Today, we are living in a kind of form of instantaneous planetary time, but I think still attitudes persist that produce this uneven response to the emergency of the end of time. So let's say climate change feels quite different in Texas than it does in Bangladesh. In this case, the urgency would be reversed. In Texas, climate change feels like it hasn't come at all or never will come. But in Florida, it feels like it just ransacked through time and space. And in Bangladesh, it does so every year when the sea rises. So I think this urgency of the crisis and the way we think about it and the way it presses upon us as an image, as a feeling, as a disposition changes. And we can see this changing in narratives. We can see this changing in cultural productions. We can see this changing in artistic works. And that is what encourages me to invoke and encourage the virtue of sobriety and patience. Even if the end of time comes, we should be patient about its coming. And we should be patient once it has gone. Because like I'm saying, I come from a culture where the end of time has actually gone in the Mahabharata. We're after the apocalypse, and we're still quite patient. And I think that that patience has a kind of revolutionary quality because it does not give the moment a certain sovereign privilege. It produces historical comparisons that allow us to say it's not so good right now, as well as it's not so bad. And looking at this pastel apocalypse in the Mughal court makes me think quite differently about the day of the apocalypse, or the Yom-e-Qiyamah, as we say, than what I see when I see it in this Dutch print. That's what I would say.
I also would like to ask you something that I feel might connect with some of the issues that we have been dealing in the last days, and it has to do with how do we negotiate and embrace the different mythical narratives. I'll start with an attempt to present a comparison about the legitimacy of the narrative and the recourse to a tradition that might be killed by colonization. It would seem to me that the way you find possibility of thinking through these different stages of tantric and Muslim thinking is something that appears extremely difficult to do in relation to the pre-Columbian inheritance of Mexico. There is a certain breaking of the signs that so far has prevented the mythological reification that Greeks myths represented for Western culture in relation to how do we handle the narratives of before the conquest, that we cannot grant them authority as means to think. And I'm very surprised because you seem to do something that is peculiar, that you, at the same time, you're able to give authority to the Mahabharata, but without making it a dogmatic source, without precisely becoming nativist and a member of the Indian right-wing Hindu ideologies. So I would like you to probably talk about that. I mean, how do you feel about that availability, if it is so? How dissident that usage that Raqs Media Collective is doing of this tradition is from the standard religious ideologies in India, and how do you feel that difference in relation to Latin America in the times you've been related to this region?
Yeah. Again, another complex, difficult question. First of all, I think that my relationship to Latin American, especially pre-Columbian realities, have to shade off into conjecture and into speculation, because I know very little about those realities. But I don't think I'm alone. I think even people in Mexico, in a comparative sense, know more, but we know very little about these realities because there is a silence that has been imposed upon them. So that means we're also free to interpret them in more than one direction. There is on the other hand, in the context that I live in, is a context of too much talk, let's say. There is too much that can be read and read into all our traditions. I mean, in this presentation, I tried to link the notion of apocalypse in three world civilizations: the Indic, the Islamic, and the Judeo-Christian. The last two being quite related, but still quite distinct in the way that they present themselves. The Islamic understanding of the apocalypse has a certain calm confidence, which I think is absent in the existential anxiety of late Christian eschatological visions. But that apart, what happens when we try and read these contending realities? And now we have other contending realities. We have the contending reality of the myth of the singularity that would be brought by artificial intelligence, the idea of climate change as being a singularity from which we cannot retreat once temperatures have given rise. I think we need to see these two as important narratives, but as narratives. as stories we are telling our time. And as long as we are able to work with the idea that the narrative and the myth at its heart consists of speculation about things we cannot know and do not know, then that gives us a kind of performative play. So what I do, or what my colleagues and I do with the Mahabharata or the apocalyptic traditions in Islamic history, or even this book of Revelations by St. John the Evangelist, is to try and treat them as fragments of partly decipherable and partly undecipherable code, as available cultural material for us to play with in order to produce speculations about how time might or might not end. Even the question of time may be ending presupposes the fact that it will not end. And it's this maybe or the perhaps or the doubt that I see implicated in all our readings of the traditions that we have. And I think that in Latin America, there is certainly a feeling of loss or mourning or lamentation of the fact of unavailability. I understand what that produces. That unavailability could also be, I don't know, implicated in a futuristic sort of sense, that these are not signs of the past, but signs of the future, that they are prophecies rather than narrative closures. I know that a lot of science fiction is increasingly delving into the idea of secrets encoded within lost time. Maybe that's the direction that we can play with. I remember that we did a CITAC conference in Mexico in 2012 when you were absent like I am today. And we called it The Future, and it was predicated on the idea of the Aztec calendar and its supposed misreading of 2012, the fact that people misread the Aztec calendar as the end of time. That misreading for me is a wonderful coincidence. We are given permission to misread all our histories and traditions, and that should allow us room for play and for maneuver.
So before I check with the room if there are questions, there's something I want to underline in your text that I felt needs to be discussed, and is the importance of understanding that the course of Ashwatthama, the wounded undead warrior, is eternity, is the endlessness of time. I think that that is probably the crux of the difference with the West, that in our narrative of the ends of time, there's the profound melancholy and terror of the possibility that eternity is not granted to this civilization.
Yeah, I mean, here eternity is the problem. To not die is the problem.
We will try not. So I'm going to ask if there's any other question. ¿Alguna pregunta? Incluso la puedo traducir al inglés, que alguno de ustedes quiera introducir. Allá atrás, por favor. There's a mic. You will not be able to see the speakers. I'm sorry about that. I will need to pretend that.
Ok, ante el panorama actual que se vive en el mundo y ante las coincidencias astronómicas, como lo hemos visto en estos últimos días, la vista de 2 cometas, eclipses anulares, también el acercamiento de un meteoro que lo comparan a una segunda luna, y lo que se vive en Medio Oriente y las guerras en el este de Europa y próximamente cambios aún a nivel continental en Norteamérica, ¿no pudiera esto relacionarse con el tema que está justamente planteándose? El fin, cuando no es el fin de los tiempos, pero se le parece por las evidencias como antes de la conquista, pues aquí la civilización mexica había visto señales en el cielo.
I will try to translate the question as best I can. So the speaker is saying that we have a coincidence between the situation of the times and a number of astronomical conditions there are two comets. There's a meteoroid that is behaving as like a second moon. There are a whole number of things that somehow behave a little bit like the omens, the signs before the conquest. So is there something to say about this in relation to the question of the end of times, this relation between a certain celestial figuration and the situation in history? And I will probably ask, what about that in relation to these cultural differences we were talking about? But yeah, please go ahead.
I mean, the sciences of astronomy and the speculations of astrology were not far from each other until very recently. Even if you look at people like Isaac Newton, he was very deeply into astrology as much as he was into astronomy. His attempt to read gravity and the motion of the stars, and even Johannes Kepler, was to try and find meaning. My position on this is that the universe is something that we increasingly know that we don't know things about. So yes, there are hovering comets. They seem to indicate a certain proximity. They can hit us. Comets have hit the Earth and produced mass cataclysms. The reason why mammals and finally us are the dominant species on the planet is because the dinosaurs had a date with a meteorite. So it can happen again. And finally, I have heard a lot of people say that nuclear weapons will finally come of some use if you can just nudge a comet off its path. But the point is that I think that we have no idea of how the universe will contract or end or change its form and shape. It can happen billions of years in the future, but there is frankly no reason why it can't happen tomorrow. It could happen tomorrow. And I think that gives us a wonderful opportunity to consider our own insignificance as well as our significance. The comets may come, and if they come, we'll have lived a fine party until the comets came. And if they come and they wipe us out, then maybe there will be a chance for new forms of life. I don't see a reason to curtail my optimism just because the comet wipes out the human race.
There's a question from somebody you know, Elena Chavez.
Hi, Shida. I'm Elena here, but you don't see me. But nice to see you even in the screen. We miss you here. I was just thinking that there was a change in the tone and the concepts in your presentation of what we've been talking about, because you bring the subject of time. We've been talking about the end of worlds, the end of living, the change in the living, but not focusing in the end of time as a concept necessarily. And I was thinking that in that way, that thinking time in human ways, it creates this relationship also with Anthropocene and Capitalocene, because time, it's so important for the creation of Capitalocene, as you know, like how capitalism create time as well, and it's a form of time that is very human. So also we're trying to deal with this idea of the post-human, and if we can try to go beyond the forms of the human as a way to characterize life, living, future. I don't know. It is more in that tension that you brought with time, focusing in time, and if there's, I don't know, like some way out of that time from the humanitarian or kind of Anthropocene or anthropocentric way of thinking time, something like that.
I didn't understand everything in the question, but I understood. And sorry, I didn't understand who is the speaker, because she certainly knows me.
Elena Chavez.
Elena Chavez. Yeah. Hi, Elena. Hi. Lovely to hear from you again. Yes. So I understood in what I could hear a certain nuanced way in which you're talking about the anxieties of emanating from the Anthropocene and what we are now, some of us are beginning to call the Capitalocene, which I think is a much more precise description of this time than the idea of the Anthropocene. Because why should we blame the 250,000 plus years of humanity on this planet for the depredations of the last 3,000 years, which is roughly the Neolithic revolution in agriculture, and then accelerated by industry. For at least 125,000 years, we seem to be living in a way that wasn't so rapacious as far as nature is concerned. So anyway, whatever it is. But I also think that the conditions of awareness that we are given today, that we have given ourselves today, is also quite remarkable. Perhaps once again, I mean, when the human species first emerged in Africa, it could see itself in planetary terms because there was maybe a very small band of humans that occupied a very small space and everybody more or less knew everybody else. We have returned somewhat to that condition today, where although we may be 8 billion, we are aware of our planetary situation. And there is a self-awareness of the human species as a species, which is unprecedented in terms of all time. And this creates certain possibilities. I know Frederick Jameson passed recently, and I think I remember him invoking some other person who said that it is easier, let's say, for Hollywood cinema to imagine the end of time than it is for Hollywood to imagine the end of capitalism. Whereas it actually should be the other way around. It should be possible for us to imagine the end of capitalism in a much more sober way, because social formations come and go. Planets end, it is true. Life ends, it is true, but less frequently than the passage of social formations. And if we take that slightly less frequency into account, then maybe we can prepare ourselves for the chaos, beautiful creative possibilities that will attend to the end of capitalism. I think we are living through one of its possible ends. We might come through, but it is certainly something is ending, right? An entire way of working with the internal combustion engine, for instance, is ending. The cars of the future will not be internal combustion engines. So even if it is capitalism, it will be capitalism of the battery, which is a very different kind of capitalism than the capitalism of the engine. So something is changing, and we are a part of that change. If we look at work and if we look at labor itself, then of course artificial intelligence could make us all redundant. But we could also use artificial intelligence to free time. It depends on the political choices that we as a species and the classes that constitute these species begin to make possible for themselves through some kind of self-aware activity. The chances of that self-aware activity, I think, are actually higher today than they have ever been. So while there is a great deal of lamentation about the rise of right-wing authoritarianisms and so on, I think there is a reason why right-wing authoritarianisms are rising. It's because there is greater connected solidarity, and obviously they have to rise to deal with that solidarity. So the jury is not out. I don't think we live in any kind of certainty, and I'm interested in the creative flourishing of this uncertainty in the direction that I desire. I don't know if I heard Elena's question properly, but I tried to answer in the spirit of mishearing and misunderstanding.
Thank you, that was really nice. ¿Alguna otra pregunta en la sala? I think there's an urgency to end today. Shudha, well, I need to be really. No, there's one. A post.
There is one. It's never the end of time.
Un poco más alto porque no escucho. Perdón, el micrófono. 1 second, because they need to broadcast.
Yeah.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me there? Would you say that the reason that the imaginaries of the end of times, the reason that it varies or differs is because it depends on the political imaginary of time? Just like Elena was saying before, maybe the time that we spend in labor, the time that we put into our human existence. Do you really think that the imaginary of the end of times vary because of that reason, because of the political imaginary of the time as a concept?
Yeah. Thank you. Again, I'm trying to answer your question in the spirit of hearing it properly. The first thing I will say is that the end of time has come and gone many times in many societies. We know that around the year 1000, there was a huge millennial anxiety in Western Europe based on just the numerical fantasies around the year 1000. We know before that, when the earliest Christian communities were emerging in the desert lands of West Asia, there was a great deal of anxiety about the apocalypse, that time would end very soon. The rapture would come now. The day of judgment was day after tomorrow. We know that in Islamic history, the end of time question has repeated itself many times. So when the Mongols invaded Baghdad and laid waste to the Second Caliphate, it was assumed that this is the end of time. And the prophecies of Gog and Magog, or as we say, Juj and Majuj, were seen as making themselves evident in the armies of the Mongols. They occurred again when the house of Saud attacked and invaded Mecca. A lot of Indian Muslims said that these people, the Salafis, who are savages and barbarians, are going to destroy Islam. And I think they did destroy a lot of Islam. So there was a way in which people, Muslims in South Asia and Central Asia, viewed the rise of the Ibn Saud, the dynasty, in Saudi Arabia as a sign of the end of time. The First World War was seen as a sign of the end of time. So different political imaginations have obviously seen different imaginations of the end of time. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, the picture that we have of the end of time was a nuclear Holocaust picture. The picture that we have today is that of climate change and AI. It's as if people have forgotten that nuclear weapons can still blow us all apart. They exist, but the picture has changed. And that's what I find fascinating, that the end of time comes with its own imagination. Or since 2019, another picture of the end of time was through a viral epidemic. So now we have many competing pictures of the end of time. That's a great thing. It allows us to be prepared in more than one way.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Doy 3. 1, 2, 3. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Shuddha. Thank you for being that early and after all of us, and for being always there and on time.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that our time doesn't end.
And that everybody insists that we know that you're in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. It's lovely. Pleasure. A great pleasure doing this. Thank you.
Cerramos así la sesión de hoy. Muchas gracias. Ya no se necesitan suicidar.